I'm Floyd Wooderson. Welcome to another session of my personal memoir, Wolves of Hemp Street. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on those bell notifications to make sure that you don't miss new chapters being uploaded weekly. Thank you for having integrity and tuning in. Chapter 6, Busy as a Bee. The time had come and it was finally time to start getting hands-on with the plant. It was surreal. Like most of those in America, I had grown up with DARE. The messages from the police officers and our teachers were pounded into our heads at a young age. Marijuana is the devil's lettuce. It's a gateway drug. It makes you do bad things. It makes you lazy. It makes you dumb. You will spend your life in prison if caught smoking it. That scared the crap out of us. But eventually, the little devil on my shoulder convinced me everything would be alright. Fast forward to 2018. Even with years of being around Mary Jane, actually working with the plant behind the madness was taboo, edgy and badass. The plant that was always whispered about in high school and college was now all around me. I was living in a bubble. In 2018 only a small group of states was able to grow hemp like this, Colorado being the main one. At that time, if I had a field of the same stuff just 200 miles east in Kansas, I would be looking at prison, if caught. It didn't matter that it was CBD, it was cannabis. Cannabis is marijuana. Marijuana is illegal. But because I was west of the thing they call a state line, I was safe. Crazy to think about. My first job with the crop was to pull males. I knew that there were male and female cannabis plants, but I really didn't know how to tell them apart. Teddy broke it down for me. At this stage the plants are pretty much past the pre-flower stage, so look for pollen sacs. You can't miss them. They look like hundreds of small, light green balls, he said. I would later find out that the shade of male plants was also lighter green, helping me to spot them from a distance, and there were a lot. Feminization rates are incredibly important for the production of both CBD and THC. If females are in contact with any decent amount of pollen, they immediately stop production of their cannabinoids, in this instance, CBD, and focus on the growth of seeds. This is very bad for farmers who are trying to get a high CBD content extracted from their plants. To make matters worse, pollen can travel for tens if not hundreds of miles, hell, maybe even thousands of miles. If sand from the Sahara travels across the Atlantic Ocean into the Caribbean, which it does, who knows what pollen can do? I can't stress it enough, we had a lot of males. Like a lot of males. Our backfield was split like a hot dog, in that Kelly and his genetics were on the backside. They all looked uniform and like beautiful Christmas trees. On the front side were plants grown from seed bought from a sketchy individual. They were the producers of the males, not Kelly's. In fact, you couldn't find one male plant on the far side. A 100% feminization rate, as good as it gets. There was even a competition to try and find a male plant in that batch, with the prize being $15 per. None. Kelly's genetics were the best. To be conservative and lower expectations from seed buyers, Kelly would usually explain that K and G seeds would have one male every acre, which was usually the case. In utter contrast, the feminization rate for the plants on the front side was around a depressing 35%. 35%. It was a disaster. When the person that sold us the seeds found out the feminization rate, he fell off the face of the earth, ducking every phone call that Julian sent his way. But we kept inventory nonetheless. At the end of each day we would report to Eli and tell him how many we had pulled for the day, in hopes that once we finally tracked this individual down, we could give him the number of males we pulled and get a massive refund for false advertising 100% fem rate. For the next week, with a couple odd jobs scattered in between, the focus was to get the males pulled and away from the females as quickly as possible. Pollen was starting to float out. Mating had begun, leaving us with an impossible task while teasing us in the pollen-infested wind. Males never stopped appearing. In the 15 or so acre section of the non-feminized, when I moved on from an area I thought I had cleared, the next day I would stumble upon 10 more dudes, as if they sprouted up overnight. It was like the Hydra in Greek mythology. Once you pulled out one male plant, 10 more appeared. Eventually I lost track of my count. It must have somewhere around 1,000, with the other guys in the crew gathering way more. I wish I knew the final count we had, but it must have been close to 10,000 or more. We started piles all around the perimeter of the field, making sure to wet them down with water in order to kill and stop the pollen before it spread. That didn't last long though, as getting water to all parts of the field was proving a hassle, even with a backpack pump sprayer. With time working against us and the sheer numbers, we had to think of something else. We opted to consolidate them into one large pile in front of the house, to wet all at once and easily trash bag them for when the trash man came. Over the course of 2 to 3 days of pulling, collecting, and transporting, the pile kept getting bigger. What was once a hill was now a mountain. And we thought we were making great progress and had solved an issue. In reality, we just created a bigger one. Well, actually two. As much as we tried to soak the pile and get every inch of pollen wet, it wasn't enough. It was enough to rot the plants and emit a stench equal to that of mustard gas, but wasn't enough to actually kill the pollen. I couldn't walk within 10 feet of the pile unless I wanted to go into a sneezing fit with watery, burning eyes and snot seeping out. But you know who did enjoy it? Bees. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of bees. It was like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for the black and yellow insect. They would leave the pile caked and fattened with the pollen they inhaled and rolled around in, mimicking a pig in mud. The now flying pig, probably carrying 50 times its body weight in pollen, would barely be able to take flight as it took off back to the hive to impress the queen. I'm sure they were all communicating with each other as they crossed by in the air. God, these humans are so dumb. They were right. We couldn't get close to bag the plants because the flying pigs were guarding them with their lives and the small but devastating poker in their bum. So the pile sat, and sat, and sat. The longer it stayed, the worse my life got. Even with all of the Zyrtec I was taking, that pile messed me up bad. It was getting harder to breathe, and I would end up sneezing, no exaggeration, more than 200 times a day. Enough was enough. I had to do something about it or slowly die from rotting, mushy, and disgusting cannabis. One afternoon I put on all of the thick clothes I could muster in a hazmat suit, one that would make Walter White proud. Protected, I went in to start bagging and tagging. It was quite an ordeal, I must say. One half of me felt like I was a beekeeper in training, while the other half was screaming from the inside. Bees were scattering or landing on me, and 10 minutes in I started to feel nauseous from the sweat I was gathering in the suit and the absolute stank sneaking in from the thousands of plant carcasses. Teddy, being the gentleman that he was, suited up after me, and joined me in the dirty job that would have made Mike Rowe proud. Over the course of 4 to 5 days, the pile was inching smaller and smaller, and by this time my sinuses had acclimated, with only a lingering headache that would commence within 5 minutes of work. Little by little the bees started to disperse to find pollen elsewhere, and the swamp in the front yard turned to grass once again. But even after that came to pass, we couldn't help but think about possible repercussions sprouting from those bees. Our remaining female plants, as well as other hemp farms in the area, were fresh targets. There are several methods of irrigation, both modern and classic. Modern technology involves pivots or subsurface irrigation. We were going the old school route, flooding. Flooding has been around since the dawn of time, and there are a couple ways to do it. The main component needed is gravity. With gravity on our side, our slanted field was working in our favor. It was designed for it. The process to get water was as such: we would call the county, they would release water from the reservoir, and it would then travel all the way down through a collection of small ravines, ditches, until it reached our farm. A ditch master would then arrive to divert the rushing water into our poly piping, feeding into our rows. Over the course of several hours, gravity would work in tandem with the water, allowing it to flow slowly down, soaking the soil around the plants. Due to certain restrictions on water rights, it was imperative to organize our watering schedule in phases and time frames, alternating rows so that we wouldn't leave any one row starving. We couldn't water them all at the same time. This left us scrambling to plug and unplug the water spouts that would shoot out into their designated rows. Here's where we came in. The force of the water exiting the spouts, or when plugs would pop out on accident, would wreak havoc on the rows, creating huge puddles over numbers of lanes for us to fix. We would have to build mud barriers in order to flood lanes that were dry or divert water from lanes that were drowning. This was a full-time job. Teddy, Angel, and I would spend hours in muck boots shoveling and redirecting, with Teddy and Angel putting in far more hours than me. I put in plenty of hours doing this, but there were several Saturdays and Sundays that I would wake up a little later than usual, and Teddy would be out there working. I don't shy away from hard work, but I don't shy away from lazy weekends either. Teddy was showcasing a prime example of true grit. There was an art to spreading out the water. What I mean by that is whenever the ditch master would come through to dam up the released reservoir water so that we would be the recipient of said water, the dams put in place would clearly make the water in our section of the ditch rise, especially if the water current was strong. I can't remember our exact number in the reservoir line, but there couldn't have been more than 10 farms in front of us. Where it could get a little complicated was if water was released from the reservoir and other farms call water the same day we were, they would take some of the water pressure away from us. Other times, we may be the only farm that calls the water on that particular day, making the water pressure much higher. Not spread out as much. Well, this was one of those days. We were the only ones that called it, and the water came fast and strong. So fast that it was impossible to monitor the water levels and the directional paths of the rows. We really needed the water in certain sections because plants were dying fast, but it was at a price. We had the ability to move some of the dams in our ditches section, in order to get more water in one section and less in another, but the problem was, the area we needed watered created a huge rise in the water levels, forming a swamp in our neighbor's backyard. The neighbor's name was Ashley, but everyone called him Tai Chi Ashley. Ashley was an older gentleman who, you guessed it, practiced Tai Chi. He was always working on his yard, which was very Taoist and Buddhist in nature, beautiful rock gardens, lavish benches, and great architectural wooden gateways. It was truly a sanctuary, until it wasn't. The water pressure was so high that his backyard was turning into the Okefenokee, making Tai Chi Ashley livid, which was the irony of it all. Practicing Taoism is a method to keep you calm, balanced, and in control of your emotions. If he didn't practice it, he may have turned into the Hulk. He came out yelling and bitching to Kelly's crew, threatening to call the cops and the ditch master. But there was nothing we could do about it. We had the right to call the water and really needed it, or else a large section of plants wouldn't make it to the next water call. But guess who was actually there that day to come to the rescue? Pompey. He was stoked to be able to help solve an issue for once. It was actually fitting as his camp setup was right behind Tai Chi Ashley's yard, very close to the flooding. The only thing that separated them was that ditch. Pompey, over the time he camped back there, may have gotten to know him a bit and developed a friendship because it seemed that things calmed down a bit after he talked to him. Shocking. I guess, due to their nicknames, Tai Chi Ashley and Pompey were sort of like yin and yang, like the scales of Libra or Gomora's dagger gifted to her by Thanos. Balanced. By the grace of Buddha, there wasn't much damage to Ashley's tranquil gardens, just a really good watering job, and it was in our best interest to release the dams, letting the water levels drop and the plants get what they got. During the time of the whole upheaval, the plants in need luckily got enough water to last the remaining days of the upcoming Indian summer. Chapter 7, Not Your Grandpa's Tobacco. My grandpa was a bit of a badass. At 17 he lied about his age just to serve as a seaman in the Navy during the tail end of World War II. His older brother, also in the Navy, as a pilot, did tours from Morocco, Florida, to Pearl Harbor. The younger of the two, my grandpa had far less time in the war than his brother, but just enough to where he had a deployment to the infamous island of Okinawa. After the war and back in KC, he married my grandma, had 6 children, and turned his attention to electrical engineering, eventually getting a degree. After most of the kids were out of the house, he accepted a job in Colorado in the early 1980s. The rest is, as they say, history. Colorado became home for many on my mother's side of the family and eventually me. I learned to shoot when I was quite young. I couldn't have been older than 9 or 10 the first time my grandpa took me. It was a beautiful summer's day in Colorado as my parents and I were out visiting for a week. It was Grandpa's idea to get me acquainted with a gun at a young age, teaching all of his children before me. So it would seem that my parents were all on board with it. My grandpa and I hopped in his Toyota and headed southwest, far from the city and in the desert and dusty parts south of Pikes Peak. Our destination was like something out of an old spaghetti western. It was a shooting range tucked up next to a large hill, with old wooden lean-tos and horseshoes nailed into them. Tumbleweeds blew across the red dirt road as we pulled in. Grandpa was greeted with what seemed like an old friend happy to see him. They chatted a bit, exchanged currency, and then we were on our way back to the empty range. There was a table close by that gravitated us toward it, and 20 yards to its right were 3 lollipop metal targets. Grandpa started unpacking everything on the table, organizing it accordingly. My impatience was growing, but he didn't care. He had no problem taking his time as he turned from bubbly to stern. What was all laughs 2 seconds ago, was now flipped to no BS. Now Floyd, he said, it's important that we take this very seriously. Too many accidents happen when people think these are toys. They aren't. A gun's always loaded and dangerous, even when it's not. I got as serious as a 10-year-old could get, yes Grandpa. But the next word stuck with me more, that's why you never point a gun at something unless you want to destroy it. Maybe it was the way he said it, or the vocabulary he used, but that last statement has always been embedded deep in my mind. Hey Floyd. Wanna go shootin'? Fog was rising off of the bodies of water in the area and a blanket of clouds was draped over the land, hiding the mountains. The temperature had dropped into the 50s, somewhat uncharacteristic of late August. Teddy had been invited to go shooting at Kelly's place and was seeing if I wanted to tag along. Kelly and Angel were the two there and Teddy was eager to shoot his rather new HK-VP9. So, Teddy, Faye, and I hopped in the car and drove about 15 minutes from Rocky Road to Kelly's property, Longhorn Ranch. When we arrived, pulling into the driveway next to the dreary, dark, and pale house, it was eerily quiet and there wasn't a soul in sight. We stood outside aimlessly for several minutes, before off in the distance we could hear the faint echo of gunfire. Teddy couldn't wait any longer. "Hey Alexa, call Angel." "Hey. How do we get back to where you are? Do we just drive?" "Ah, okay, we'll wait." "What did he say?" I asked. "It's too muddy for my Veloster. They're gonna come get us." The gunfire stopped echoing in the valley, and before long we could hear the sound of a revved-out engine approaching. It wasn't a big V8 or diesel truck, as I was expecting, but a Polaris Ranger UTV. Angel, who was riding shotgun, had a big shit-eating grin on his face. In the driver's seat must have been the man behind the legend. The Invisible Man. El Fantasma. Kelly. The same as Teddy, Angel, and I. Kelly was in his late 20s, wore a baseball cap, and had a thick dark beard. "Hop on," Angel yelled. The three of us squeezed into the back seat and then, with a roar of the engine, took off into the fog. Mud was splattering and flying up all around us as we went screaming through different sections of the property, all new to me. We passed multiple barns, farm equipment, pens that were once used for horses, and then out to open pastures, all while driving through deep puddles and avoiding mud to the face. The property went on, much bigger than Rocky Road. My guess was that it was triple or quadruple the size. At the very edge of the property was where we finally stopped next to a man-made hill, our shooting area. The hill had several wood boards and pop cans propped up as makeshift targets. Without wasting any time, Angel put a magazine in his Glock 19 and Kelly loaded up his SIG. I looked at Teddy, and he was ready to rock and roll himself. Kelly handed out earplugs to us and gave Teddy the go-ahead. Setting his feet shoulder-width apart, his right foot slightly in front of the left, he brought his arms together with the VP9 firmly in his grip. "Fire in the hole," he yelled with both eyes open. He took a second or two to aim and then pulled the trigger. For being a small caliber round, the sound of the 9mm echoed loudly throughout the land, bouncing off any nearby structures before going silent again, awaiting the next shot. Teddy was dead on, not missing single a target. Some people would have called him a dead eye. The other two gentlemen would give Teddy a run for his money, and even when Faye got up there to shoot her brand new Ruger, she was on target. I was about ready to end the consistency of the crew. I nervously grinned and grabbed the pistol from Teddy and tried to remember the fundamentals from at least 3 to 4 years prior, which was the last time I held a gun. As much as I loved firearms, there was really no need to have a gun in Denver, and they are basically illegal in Australia. So after mimicking Teddy, I put my feet into the Weaver stance, raised the VP9 with both arms, and looked dead set at a pop can. Bold move for a rusty nail. Both eyes open, I squeezed the trigger expecting the pop can to fly up in the air with a loud ting. Silence. Is this thing broken? I thought to myself while inspecting the rail. Let's try this again. Just shut your right eye, dude, they won't notice. Amateur hour. Let's just say, if I ever wanted to be like James Bond, closing one I wouldn't cut it, but it did help. My pride remained somewhat intact when, after the 4th or 5th shot, the ting of the can was heard. We were probably out there for around 30 minutes, and the whole time Kelly was pretty quiet. Maybe it was the first meeting. Maybe because he was a little high. But he was reserved while a bit giggly at Angel's jokes. I was a new face, so he was probably just shy. We packed it up and hopped back into the UTV, calling it a day. But I wanted more. That wasn't enough to scratch the itch that hadn't been scratched in years. I needed a pistol of my own. In fact, that was the conversation on the car ride back to Rocky Road. Teddy was explaining to me that with harvest a month away, he and Julian had been discussing a 3 to 4 person security team who would work around the clock to protect our hemp. The job being such a high priority and potentially dangerous, I would need a sidearm if I wanted to be a part of it, which I did. Although Julian didn't like guns or any kind of violence, he understood that it was a necessity. This was no longer your grandpa's tobacco. This was at scale, outside, cannabis. It was definitely nowhere near the spot prices marijuana, but pounds of high-quality hemp were still going for around $50 each at that time. This is a rough estimate, but if each plant could yield around a pound of flower and there were 1,500 plants an acre on a 30-acre plot, you could potentially gross around $2 million, less your maintenance and labor costs. Regardless, as a gentleman would later tell me over the phone as he shockingly listened to the numbers I presented to him, that's cocaine money, Floyd. Not your grandpa's tobacco anymore. It wasn't more than a week after the range day that Teddy took me to the neighborhood pawn shop/gun shop in town. Inside, I went up and down the display booth, chatted with those behind the counter and tried out multiple styles, calibers, and brands. I wanted a 9mm but couldn't find anything that fit my hand quite as perfectly as the VP9 did. I couldn't afford anything of equal quality to the HK anyways. In fact, I was still pretty much plumb broke. That first visit, after wasting everyone's time, including the sales assistant, who was eager to gain a commission from me, I walked out empty-handed. A couple days later, Teddy offered to front me until I got my paycheck that coming Friday. So we were back in the shop, and I had narrowed it down to a Springfield XD or a Glock 19. After much debate, I went for the Glock. Several magazines and a box of ammo, and I was out the door $500 in debt to a stand-up guy. As if fronting me wasn't enough, Teddy also gave me his old drop-leg holster, perfectly fit for the Glock. It was my first step into becoming what they call in the farm life a good old boy. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that bell notification to be reminded when new chapters are posted each week. And until next time, don't forget to have integrity.